Terraria's many biomes greatly contribute to its immersion, progression, and a whole lot of the other stuff that makes the game so good. But since there's a pretty large number of them and not all biomes are created equally, I'll be putting together a list of the pros and cons of all of Terraria's core biomes to rank them in order of best to worst. Before we start though, I want to establish a few things. First, mini biomes will be included, but only as a part of a larger biome that they spawn in, excluding the mini biomes that are not biome dependent. As well as that, I won't directly include both the overworld and cavern versions of each biome, I'll just be combining them into one. Alright, let's get started. Coming in at dead last, at number 12, we have the space biome. While I definitely think that space is a cool biome in Terraria, it really just doesn't have much going for it. It has a new background, unique music, low gravity, sky islands, and 2 enemies. That's it. You could say that it's where the Martian probes spawn, but space only makes them more common as they can still spawn farther towards the surface. Moving on to number 11, we have the forest biome. This is generally the biome that you will spawn in most of your worlds, and it does have a decent assortment of enemies, but in all honesty, zombies, demon eyes, blue and green slimes, possessed armor, etc. really aren't very useful, especially because their purpose can be fulfilled in other biomes, or they can just spawn in other biomes. The main issue with the forest is that there really isn't much truly exclusive to it. It does have goblin scouts, but those aren't really needed for most players. The only things that are 100% useful and exclusive to the forest are pylons and its quest fish. There's also a ton of critters that can spawn there, which is pretty cool, but it's nothing special. Number 10 is the glowing mushroom biome. The glowing mushroom biome is the smallest of these biomes based on how it naturally spawns, but it does have some decent content to it. For starters, it's the home to the truffle worm, which can spawn Duke Fishron, a really great boss for its drops and a great fight as well. The reason that the glowing mushroom made its way above the other two though is Shroomite. Shroomite is nearly essential for any ranged playthrough no matter what type of weapons you choose. It also can craft the hoverboard, Shroomite digging claws, and Druid containment unit. Then coming in at number 9, we have the ocean biome. Oceans have 3 features that I would say put them above the others, and those are Duke Fishron and the pirates, the angler and fishing, and underwater chests. While both Fishron and the pirate invasion are both optional, they have some really useful items for where they are in the game, and Ocean houses the route to spawning both. The angler is also a really great way to get lots of items through a unique way of playing the game, which is really useful for items like the shell phone and the bottomless water bucket. Water chests have recently become crucial to crafting Terraspark boots, and the ocean is the easiest way to find them. The ocean also has a pylon of its own as well. There's generally nothing bad to say about it other than it just lacks a bit compared to the others. Number 8 is going to be the desert biome. This one was pretty difficult to place because the biomes that have biome keys generally tend to be the core biomes of Terraria, but unfortunately even with a really good underground soundtrack, the desert just doesn't have nearly as much of an impact as the rest. The desert also happens to be the only remaining biome with no exclusive boss, and it generally ends up lacking a bit unless you're looking for its much more niche items that tend to be super optional and not very optimal. Still, not at all a bad biome though. Moving on to number 7 is going to be the snow biome. The snow biome is very similar to the desert in many ways. It has Crimson and Corruption variants, a hard mode revamp of enemies, a weird hybrid armor set, special weather events, and they both have biome keys as well. The reason that I've decided to put the snow biome above the desert is simply because it has a boss. While the Deerclops is super optional and it's very new, it's one of the only things that separates the two, and bosses in Terraria kind of have a lot of value when it comes to content and usefulness. I do also think that the snow biome has a little bit better underground loot, just sort of on the surface, but the desert stuff ends up being more particular. Number 6 was a much easier choice, and that would be the Underworld. I feel like the Underworld is kind of carried by the Wall of Flesh, but its weapons from Shadow Chests as well as its few drops are very good. Obsidian and Molten Armor as well as Molten Weapons and Tools are super solid as well. The only reason that I decided to put it above the previous biomes, though, is because there's no downside. Nothing too complex or hard to decide, it's just a really good, important biome for progression, causing the transition into hard mode. And finally, to kick off our top 5, we have the dungeon. I actually didn't realize that the dungeon was considered a biome until I started working on this video, but the amount of value and importance it has makes a lot of sense. The dungeon contains 2 bosses, Skeletron and the Lunatic Cultist, which happen to both be required to beat the game. As well as bosses, the dungeon contains around 20 new enemies, unlocks 2 new NPCs, it has a crazy amount of new weapons and accessories for every class, as well as access to the Bewitching and Alchemy tables. It also unlocks a really useful resource, Ectoplasm. Ectoplasm crafts Spectre armor, tools, and the spawners for both the Pumpkin and the Frost Moon, which are obviously really useful events, and they can provide even more loot on top of what the dungeon already has. And with all that, I think it's pretty obvious why I put the dungeon so high. Moving on, number 4 was a really tough decision, but it's going to be the Hollow. The Hollow overall is a staple in Terraria with its majestic and magical themed enemies, loot, and atmosphere. It includes a huge variety of items, but most notably Hollowed Mimic drops, the Rod of Discord, and the rewards for killing the Empress of Light and the Queen Slime. Honestly, there's not a whole lot more to say, and it's pretty obvious why the Hollow is superior to the others. Now, this is where the video starts to get interesting. We're down to the top 3 biomes, and 2 of these require a really tough decision. The Crimson and the Corruption have started a bit of a rivalry in the Terraria community over time, ever since the Crimson was added in 1.2. I personally have always preferred to choose Corruption. I like it better visually and it tends to have more items that I enjoy using, but in the end, this is a list about the best and not my favorite. So coming in at number 3, we have the Corruption. The reason the Corruption is beating out the Hollow on this list is simply because it spans across the entire game. Generally, the Hollow, Corruption, and Crimson tend to all be very similar, but the Hollow is the only one that doesn't prove itself useful in pre-hard mode. If you think that the Hollow has better items, that's fine, and I don't disagree in some ways. The Hollow is just mad late to the party, and it's gonna get docked for that. But now we move on to number 2, which is of course the Crimson. The Crimson biome is the younger brother of the 2 evil biomes, and it ends up barely edging out the Corruption, because it's simply just slightly more consistent. Ichor is better than Cursed Flames, Vampire Knives are better than the Scourge of the Corruptor, Flesh Knuckles are better than the Putrid Scent, and the Brain of Confusion is better than the Worm Scarf. Obviously this pattern doesn't stay 100% consistent all the way through, but it does work more than it doesn't. And finally, the moment you've all been waiting for, the number 1 best biome in all of Terraria is the jungle. Terraria's jungle biome, from start to finish, contains amazing loot for every single class in the game. It houses 3 bosses if you include Golem, and 2 of them are required for progression. Chlorophyte makes some of Terraria's best armor sets, best ammo types, best weapons, and so much more. The Witch Doctor is essential to any summoner playthrough. A crazy amount of fishing bait can be found there, I don't know. The Queen Bee has a ton of really great Wall of Flesh weapons. The underground chest loot is some of the best in pre-hard mode, and it's easily one of the best places to go when you first start off the game. The Jungle Key provides a decent weapon for rangers, and it has a pylon of its own, although that's not really all that special. And best of all, of course, it has toucans. I mean, like, come on. But anyways, thank you all for watching, and please subscribe so I can beat out the Cool Math Games search results. Have a great day, and bye-bye.